Thank you all so much for coming. I so appreciate it. This evening I'm going to be discussing a topic that has become very important to me over the past year, and I'm very excited to finally get to share my research with you all. The title for this lecture presentation is She Had the Look of Lavender Flowers, New Insights into Lili Boulanger, and it's inspired by a translation of a line from Boulanger's song cycle, Clairières dans le ciel, this collection that we're going to be exploring together tonight. In modern literature, the majority of scholarship has focused entirely on composer Lili Boulanger's disability due to her chronic illness and her short life from 1893 to 1918. Consequently, most of academia fixates on how her work was affected by her physical fragility, often ignoring the merit of her music itself. Musicologist Annegret Fauser asserts that Lili Boulanger won the Prix de Rome Prize in 1913 due solely to her exploitation of a public image as a femme fragile, and less in part to her musical achievement. In her article for the Journal of Royal Musical Association describing Boulanger's historic win, Fauser actually states, "It caused a sensation, especially because the prize winner was only 19 years old, a beautiful and fragile young woman who deliberately cultivated her public persona as a child genius, even in interviews." Fellow musicologist Anya Berry affirms a similar point, that Boulanger's main contribution to society was as a good sufferer and someone who took full advantage of the femme fragile trope. Now, this trope is not just a relic of the early 1900s, and it's still being written about today. In her 2012 dissertation entitled Lili Boulanger in World War France, Mobilizing Motherhood and Good Suffering, Berry states, Boulanger's perceived and constructed identity as a sickly, delicate, sacrificial child genius enabled her to negotiate a public compositional sphere, typically off limits to women, and to become one of the most highly successful French composers of the early 20th century. Now, such opinions have spread throughout the academic music world and have greatly affected the way Boulanger is perceived. In general, her compositions like the song cycle Clairières dans le ciel take a back seat to the works of her more famous sister, Nadia, and are less known and performed than many of her contemporaries. When they are executed, it's often done with a noticeable one-dimensionality and a sense of ambiguity about the composer's intent. Interpretations of Boulanger's music should be comprehensively acknowledge both her physicality and her mental fortitude. A true, fully dimensional portrayal of Lili Boulanger needs to be revealed and realized. Because illness placed restraints on her physical capacity, scholarship, in turn, has since placed similar limitations on her artistic and intellectual abilities. The two are not congruent. While Boulanger recognized her physical restrictions, she embraced no boundaries for her mental and emotional capacity, and instead focused on pursuing her musical potential to its fullest. In this presentation, I want to show you the many sides of Lili's colorful life and persona, and how exactly they can be encompassed into any performance of her music. Though Lili Boulanger was physically frail due to a chronic illness, her mental tenacity developed in response, emboldening her to devote every ounce of strength she possessed to creating incredibly passionate and vivid works of art that reflect both her struggle and her fortitude. It's clear from my research that Lili Boulanger saw herself in the character of her song cycle, Clairières dans le ciel, and composed the music in such a way that she was able to intertwine her own personal story in the music. In many ways, Clairières dans le ciel can be seen as both a character study and a confrontation of her life and illness. Throughout the cycle, Boulanger does not shy away from the difficult reality of her illness and impending death. She instead straightforwardly faces her mortality, using it as material to fuel her musical style. In Clairières dans le ciel, I have found that Boulanger uses her life with illness as an energy source for her creative identity, which I will demonstrate through a more nuanced interpretation of the music later on. It's our responsibility as modern musicians to recognize the autobiographical nature of Clairières dans le ciel and to seek out ways that we can more accurately communicate the abundant complexity of Boulanger's character in the music. Lili Boulanger's early life experience with numerous illnesses was very influential in her biographical interpretation of source material. 2 years after her 1893 birth in Paris, Lili developed a severe case of bronchial pneumonia from which she was doubted to survive. Though she was not killed by the virus, as a result of it, she would spend the rest of her life suffering from a shattered immune system. In addition to her exceedingly low immunity, she was also diagnosed at a young age with intestinal tuberculosis, known today as Crohn's disease. Now, many people, including my father, live full lives with Crohn's disease, but at that time, little was available in terms of treatment, and it was considered a death sentence. Despite her treatment by her immediate family as a delicate invalid, she showed early in childhood an infectious passion for life and art. As cited by her biographer, Leonie Rosenstiel, and based on primary accounts, in spite of her frequent bouts with illness, Lili was an affectionate child with an active sense of humor. She reveled in the atmosphere of camaraderie and warmth, and greatly enjoyed the practical jokes that prevailed among the Boulanger family, their friends, and neighbors. Though her journey to a musical career was an uphill battle from the very beginning due to constant forced isolation and physical caution, Boulanger was determined not to let her illness define her. Boulanger found ways around her ill health to work persistently through her pain on her musicianship, in the form of private tutoring in her home, in music theory, organ, harmony, counterpoint, and composition. She frequently audited her sister Nadia's classes at the Paris Conservatoire, and established a rapport with the greatest musical minds in Paris at the time, including Gabriel Fauré, Louis Vierne, Paul Vidal, and Georges Caussade. Boulanger's win of the 1913 Prix de Rome displays a fine example of her immense strength and tenacity. She had actually initially entered the competition in 1912, but she was forced to withdraw shortly before competing in the final round due to a severe relapse in her illness. But, true to form, Boulanger returned the next year to compete again, ready to work even harder. The composition was grueling and anxiety-inducing even for someone in perfect health. At the end of the competition, Boulanger was forced to enlist the help of a fellow competitor to physically write out the final presentation copies of her score because she was too weak to even hold a pencil. Even with the obstacle of her ill health, her lack of experience, and the sheer fact that she was a woman and subject to belittling sexism, Lili Boulanger still became the first female composer to win the Prix de Rome in 1913 with her cantata Faust et Hélène. There are some modern scholars that argue that this win was due to the judges' bias and pity, but there is a first-hand testimony that tells us this was not the case. The magnitude of her win was emphasized in a statement by event reporter Émile Viémot. "Do not be fooled," he says. "This deed stands on its own merits. Not only did the gallantry of the judges not intervene to facilitate her victory, but it could be said that they were stricter with this young girl of 19 than with her competitors. The misogyny of the jury was known. The entry of an Eve into the earthly paradise of the Villa Medici was dreaded by certain patriarchs as the equal of total catastrophe." Boulanger's fortitude in the face of debilitating illness and prejudice continued after the competition ended, and she began composition of the song cycle Clairières dans le ciel the following year. As a result of the Prix de Rome win, she was awarded a supported residency at the Villa Medici in Rome. However, because of her physical instability and low stamina, her travel to the Villa Medici required frequent stops, and it lasted months. During the long trip, instead of wallowing in her unpredictable nature of her health, she returned to composing a new work with extra time on her hands. Clairières dans le ciel was based on a book of poetry titled Tristesse, given to her by her dearest friend, Mickey Piret. Tristesse was written by Francis Jammes, a French poet whose works are known for their lyricism, pastoral themes, and strong religious elements. The poetry of Francis Jammes allowed Boulanger to speak clearly through her music, and allowed for her to also have a cathartic release of her built-up emotions. As someone who was subject to emotional and physical confinement for most of her life, it's no wonder that Boulanger found a home in the poetry of the symbolist movement, known for its authenticity of human emotion revealed through a veil of ambiguity and subtlety. Boulanger transformed and enhanced the poetry of Tristesse to echo her personality and life's journey through her composition's framework and content. Now, out of the 24 original works in Jammes' poetic cycle, Boulanger carefully chose to set only 13 of them. This is significant. The composer had a very personal connection and obsession with the number 13. She attached a mystical significance to the number based on the fact that her name contained 13 letters, and her initials, LB, could be written to resemble the number 13 as well, which eventually came out on the cover. According to scholar Bonnie Jo Dopp, adopting 13 as her lucky number could well have represented laughter in the face of fate for Lili, who was extremely sick all of her life. I believe that Boulanger saw herself in all of the characters of the poetic cycle, sometimes attaching herself to the protagonist narrator, the subject heroine, and even the supporting characters. In my analysis for this presentation, I have focused on just 7 of the 13 total songs in the cycle. Throughout this presentation, I will reference lines of the original French. In the interest of time, I don't translate them all for you, but please feel free to refer to the paper translations that I've given to you. The first song in Clairières dans le ciel, entitled Elle était descendue au bas de la prairie, embodies Boulanger's happy childhood memories of her family home in the Gagenville countryside, with an underlying current that hints at hardship to come. The text speaks nostalgically of a heroine frolicking freely in the meadows with, quote, an awkward grace particular to tall, lanky girls. This was a direct nod to Boulanger herself and her physical appearance. It's acknowledged musically in the accompanimental line, where we see a seemingly awkward instance of syncopation for the first time. Throughout the song, the uplifting energy of nostalgia is emphasized by a constantly ascending vocal line. In performance, I believe it's very important that the singer imbue the vocal line with a similar energy that accentuates the notated dynamic marking. One example of this occurs in the words Elle gagna le haut de cette prairie-là, était toute fleurie, which translates as she reached the top of this meadow that was full of flowers. The vocal line here ascends in pitch toward the top of the singer's range. The singer, therefore, should increase the volume and rubato stretch to further enhance the text in a way that denotes the energy of the heroine as she gleefully attempts to climb to the highest point of the meadow. Within this song specifically, we see an unanticipated interruption in momentum, which becomes kind of a compositional style that evokes a feeling of anticlimax. Boulanger has set the text in a way so that every time the listener hears the heroine trying to reach the top of the meadow, we hear an accompanying climbing of pitch and volume of the voice. Now, one would think that this is an example of typical text painting, but just at the moment when it seems as though the climactic resolution will occur with complete freedom of dynamic and fulfilled upward chromatic motion, these climbing motives are interrupted by a sharp contrast of opposing dynamic and plummeting pitch. In this way, the heroine of the text never quite reaches the top of the meadow, just as Boulanger herself never experienced true freedom as a result of her illness. The song ends with the words, Elle avait le regard qu'ont les fleurs de lavande. She had the look of lavender flowers. Lavender as a flower is often considered sacred in nature. Its violet flowers are thought to be the most delicate and precious. Elle est gravement gaie, the second number in the cycle, acts as a sort of introductory piece for Boulanger, showing her as a woman of delicate femininity and energy through its text. A 3-bar introduction featuring steady repeated ostinato chords creates an environment of tranquility into which the voice seamlessly enters. Boulanger emphasizes some of the contradictory nature of the text through unexpected word stressing. The heroine is described in the text as gravely cheerful. Now, while these may seem to be very different words, both describe facets of the heroine's complex personality. Boulanger's simpler, complicated temperament is described by biographer Leonie Rosenstuhl again. Boulanger's gaiety was shared with only her closest friends, and most of those who knew her superficially found her an intense but extremely serious child. As the narrator remembers times that were more innocent and bittersweet in the second section, we hear the emergence of a musical motive that will present itself in the next few songs of the cycle. This motive is characterized by a rhythmically offset descending of fifths and sixths and creates an impression of musical falling tears. Of particular note in Boulanger's setting of the words pensée and pensée. These two words have almost the exact same spelling, but they convey different meanings due to the addition of the letter S. The first instance of pensée with no S occurs at the bottom of the first page. This pensée translates to mean thoughts and is set to an octave plunging from E5 to E4 in the voice. The second instance of pensée, this time with the added letter S, occurs in the last words of the piece. Here the word translates to mean pansies. It's also set with a lowering of pitch, this time with a smaller interval from G sharp 5 to E5, evoking a similar motivic gesture of sinking. Interestingly, the word etymology behind pensée and pensée also implies a connection. The flower name that we all know as a pansy is actually derived from a French word, pensée, originally. In floriography, which refers to the cryptological communication through flowers, a pansy is known as a symbol of remembrance and recollection of thoughts. Thoughts, pensée. These thoughts are musically accompanied by this falling tear motive beneath. It is my belief that the recurring instability of the first pitch sliding down to a second was Boulanger's way of subtly hinting at her underlying emotional turmoil. The falling tear motive that supplements the text could have represented Boulanger's own tears, along with her desire to be remembered by others after she is gone. When it is sung, an éclavement gai should start off confidently with a stable pulse, but this confidence should be reflected as beginning to falter as the song proceeds. As these thoughts further enter the narrator's mind, the tempo should fluctuate, and the steady pulse of the introduction can all but disappear. Both pensée words, with and without the added S, should be treated as exasperated sighs to draw attention to them and further indicate their symbolic meaning. The third number in the cycle, Parfois je suis triste, metaphorically depicts Boulanger's constantly shifting relationship with her unpredictable health through her use of musical sectionalism. This piece encapsulates both the joy she encounters when in good health and the sorrow she feels whenever she is sick and physically unable to pursue her passions. The musical sectionalism is indicated by quickly changing tempos, dynamics, and register shifts that reflect the textual mood. The first section begins with a steady, repeated ostinato figure of quarter notes, creating a sort of funerary drone for the voice to enter upon the words, "Sometimes I am sad." The introductory chant section is reminiscent of psalmody and is contrasted abruptly with a glissando-like chain of 30-second notes that lead into a new section. The change of the music's character happens immediately in this section of the song and accompanies a text that states a surprising reversal of emotion with the words, "Suddenly I think of her, and then I am happy." Here, we can interpret the her mentioned as the healthy woman Boulanger desperately wants to be. The happiness related here is the sheer bliss Boulanger experiences while composing and enjoying friends and family, something often ignored by contemporary scholars and performers. It is vital to contrast these first two sections with differing articulation and energy, since both are marked piano and dynamic. The first section should be sung with a sort of legato lethargy, while the second can be instantly transformed with sprightly marcato intensity. As the second section comes to an end, the musical inertia increases with an indicated sans ralentir and continued rippling chords spread between the treble and the bass. The rapturous elation constructed comes to an abrupt halt with the return to tempo 1 in section 3. With the direction of douloureux from the composer, the listener experiences another sharp transformation from the lively, upbeat music to what is actually the first outright statement of pain and grief uttered by the narrator in the whole cycle. This section, I believe, should be treated as recitative, unmetered and raw in comparison with the music that preceded it. Unfiltered emotion is revealed through the words "Mais je redeviens triste," and the sparse accompaniment that leaves the voice almost entirely alone in its own agony. The final measures of this section include heavy, dissonant chords on the downbeat, as well as a sounding of the lowest note in the piece, written to be played an octave lower than even notated. Boulanger writes that the voice in this section should be très soutenu, very strong, and with the piece's first forte dynamic. This portion of the piece may represent another facet of Boulanger's character, one that strongly persists through the immense pain and weight of constant hardship. Here I see obvious connections to Boulanger's perseverance and tendency to work until the point of complete physical depletion. As this third section ends, the falling tear rhythmic motif from Elle est gravement gaie appears and draws the ear out of this moment of complete sensitivity and honesty back into metered reality. The short fourth section is characterized by calm oscillating of empty chords, missing the fifth, occurring with the words "Elle est la jeune fille à l'âme toute claire." This part of the piece sounds kind of like a repeating mantra, and perhaps references the similarly composed persona that makes up yet another facet of Boulanger's character, the collected image she portrays to society. With a return to Tempo 1, the final section of the song begins, suggested to be performed sans couleur et doux et efface. This should be sung with as little color and emotion as possible, and even a tinge of bitterness, indicating Lili's unhappy but willing acceptance of fate. The sixth piece of the cycle, Si tout ceci reste qu'on pourrait, is characterized by exposed honesty, uncertainty, and fate in all aspects of the text and the music. Each line of the text in the song begins with an incomplete conditional clause, starting with the word if. Some of these if statements include, if this is all just a dream, if life is nothing but disillusionment, and I do not know if I shall recover. The music is absolutely drenched in uneasiness from the very beginning, with a repeating sequence that is highly reminiscent of Wagner's Tristan and Isolde prelude, desire-longing motif. This motif is portrayed through an ascending, slow chromatic line that seems to yearn towards higher pitches, but fails each time to rise beyond an A-flat. The same pitches are frustratingly repeated, unable to surpass the A-flat until the seventh repetitive measure. In the final section of the song, these same chromatic pitches return, signifying Boulanger's longing for a world beyond the unyielding prison of her own body. Throughout the piece, uncertainty is further reflected in that all of the vocal entrances come in on an offbeat. It's almost like avoiding the confident downbeat of each measure. This underlying sense of foreboding is further intensified by increased chromaticism and asymmetrical rhythms. Apprehension is masterfully built by Boulanger in this work, with energy proceeding to a climax on the words en passion. Momentum is cultivated by subtly increasing the tempo and density of notes. Indicated to be played tortua from the poetry, the listener can visualize the tortuous pain of one's own racing thoughts, creating a sombre folie over an unpredictable but impending fate. The rush of agitation built throughout the piece dissipates as it ends with the most terrifying words yet spoken. Je ne sais si je guérirai. An informed performance of this piece relies equally on the singer and the pianist. The accompanist should treat each repetition of the chromatic motive with a different attitude, imbuing increasingly more frustration and exhaustion. The voice, in turn, needs to enter in complete coordination with the piano, as if emerging seamlessly from the somber atmosphere the repeated motive creates. The goal of representing complete consumption in the music can be further enhanced by the way the held notes are performed. The artist should input a decrescendo on each lengthened note to create the constant effect of fading. Finally, the ending notes can fade off into non-existence just as unassumingly as they began. Deux Encolies, or Two Columbines, acts as a final moment of reprieve from the highly emotional content of the earlier songs before diving into the final three extremely emotionally charged pieces of the cycle. Columbines here refer to the hardy wildflower that is often used to symbolize strength because of its ability to grow in adverse conditions. The song paints a mood of nostalgia once again, evocative of the innocence in the very first piece of the cycle. I believe the two Columbine sisters are meant to signify Lili and her older sister, Nadia. A childlike ambience begins immediately with a flurried entrance of gentle triplets in the piano, creating an image of flapping wings and water splashing. The voice is directed to enter soon after, à mi-voix très fin, at half voice, very thin. The song passes quickly, and with the short time allotted, the voice should echo the flexibility and weightlessness of the piano accompaniment as the two Columbines converse. In this piece, one must allow for the symbolist poetry to take center stage by performing in as straightforward and as simple a manner as possible. Parce que j'ai souffert, the third to last piece in the cycle, acts as a springboard into the culmination of feeling present in the final masterpiece, Demain fera un an. The mood of extreme melancholy is present from the very beginning of Parce que j'ai souffert. Boulanger's ability in this piece to express such a difficult subject with elegance, candor, and confidence is awe-inspiring. The poem depicts the sleepless nights and agony felt by the narrator, who knows all along that their fate is sealed. Beginning with a chant-like vocal line reminiscent once more of psalmody, as the song proceeds, we see an increased agitation in the text. This turmoil is further emulated in harmony that becomes even more intensely chromatic. Underneath the dense chromaticism, the pain of the narrator can be identified in the resounding pedal point of the bass. Of particular note is a recurring chordal motif characterized by parallel octaves in the treble of the piano. The octave chords are especially striking because of their sudden tonality and high placement on the keyboard, and it's made even more memorable by the augmented second between B flat and C sharp that repeats with the octave span. Programmatically, this chordal motive occurs immediately following the familiar chant-influenced introduction and could indicate religious overtones. The chordal motive brings to mind the sound of church bells and leaves the listener wondering what they are declaring. I believe this motive indicates a kind of summoning for Boulanger to someplace beyond, and perhaps the relief for which the narrator was searching. In describing the final piece of the song cycle, scholar Mary Beth Kyriakos states, Demain fera un an, number 13, is a distillation of the ideas presented in the rest of the cycle. As Schubert did his Winterreise, Lili Boulanger creates a psychological message out of the disparate elements of the 12 preceding songs by interweaving in this last song elements of the others. At this point in the cycle, the narrator is tired from a long journey filled with a whirlwind of different emotions, left only with memories and a desire for catharsis. This could be directly related to Boulanger's physical exhaustion and realization that she would not live much longer. At age 21 in 1914, when the cycle was composed, she had only 3 more years left to live. This song echoes elements of loss, happiness, acceptance, and anguish as the music travels through the memories of the songs preceding. Demain fera un an is a perfect example of Boulanger's use of sexualism. Included in this final 9-minute work are 10 distinct sections distinguished individually through 10 separate musical memories. This final jewel of a piece begins with a solitary D in the voice, accompanied by heavy, separated chords in the piano. The vocal line brings to mind psalmody once more, and together with the organ-like chords of the piano accompaniment, It evokes a feeling of dramatic finality. While listening, one can imagine the extreme loneliness and despair felt by Boulanger as she bravely walked alone through the last years of her life. It is in this final work that I believe Boulanger confronts and accepts her fate and mortality. Interspersed throughout the piece are notable allusions to songs from earlier in the cycle, specifically Parce que j'ai souffert, Si tous les composaient, and Elle était descendue au bas. The musical memory of Parce que j'ai souffert is evident in the chant-like nature of this very first section, and it evokes the pain character of the previous song. The vocal line itself even revolves around the same centralizing note of the previous piece, D natural. The text also references words from earlier poetry, bringing back some key topics like suffering, flowers, and insomnia. Si tout ceci n'est qu'un poème returns initially with the exact same notes and rhythms in the third section of De ma Ferrand, but this time with different text. Though it begins as a direct copy, the momentum is quickly altered, and the music rapidly speeds toward more chromatic pitches with agitated text and an exclamation. Following the abrupt exclamation, the music halts, and we hear the sparsest accompaniment of the piano yet. This scant cushion of notes emphasizes the solo voice and its inherent loneliness in a way not yet heard. The final musical allusion to earlier in the cycle emerges at the very end of the song, with an exact copy of the music and text from the first piece, Elle était descendue au bas. As the vocal lines speak of the beautiful meadow one last time, the recollection dissipates and quietly returns to the psalmodic music of the introduction, with the corresponding words, nothing, I have nothing to sustain me. In these final moments of the cycle, it appears as if the music will end with these hopelessly barren words and fragmented accompaniment. However, in the last measures, light streams through in the form of the restituted church bell motive. This provides a necessary resolution for the listener after the considerable emotional toll of the cycle. The bells finally seem to toll for Boulanger, and perhaps we witness her acceptance. In conclusion, Lili Boulanger may have been the victim of terminal illness, but she bravely faced it head-on. She did not want to be identified so narrowly, and this is evident in her song cycle, Clairières dans le ciel. In her composition, Boulanger heroically grapples with her illness and confronts her mortality while keeping her joy and memories close. As interpreters and ambassadors of her music, we must examine all aspects of Lili Boulanger and view the full picture of her life, her strengths and weaknesses, to create a complete work of art that honors, not hinders, her memory. We are the musical curators of Boulanger's legacy, and must focus less on what she did in spite of her disability, and more on what her disability enabled her to do. Lili Boulanger's legacy extends further than the performance of her works. She was a woman beyond her time, who did her best to outpace the prejudice of the world in which she lived. In the short time she did live, she was able to break past barriers placed on her by gender and ability. Though it may feel as if she existed a long time ago, in reality, Lili Boulanger wrote Clairières dans le ciel only a little over a century ago. Today, we may feel that we have traversed beyond the restricting obstacles of that time, but there are still barriers to interpreting her music with necessary nuance. Sexism and ableism continue to plague our society, although perhaps in a more furtive manner than in the past. By authentically performing the music of tenacious women like Lili Boulanger, maybe we too can create genuine art that transcends the horizon of our generation. Okay, so now I will open the floor to questions, and then after questions we'll take a short 5 to 10 minute break, and I'll come back and sing some of these for you. So, any questions from anyone? I'll go this way first. I'll take Dr. Miller and I think that's Sophia.
Very interesting, thank you. Did the poet and composer know each other or communicate?
They did not know each other, and I don't think they ever communicated, actually. She did communicate with some of the other composers, or some of the other poets that she used the works of, but she never actually, I don't think, was face-to-face with him.
Thank you.
So yes, you mentioned that it seems a lot like in this piece, the piece mirrors pieces of her life and her experience navigating through the world. Is there anything beyond the parallels and the similarities between that and her life that would indicate that it was sort of an expression of that? Maybe any kind of communication that she had, or any written sort of, did she write anything about the works, or?
You know, she actually never saw this performed. She never actually got to see it.
Okay.
It was published officially in 1919, and she died in 1918.
Mm-hmm.
She actually said several times, there was, I can't remember the exact quote, but she said that I feel like I have become one with the heroine in this piece. So she did acknowledge that, absolutely. And it was made pretty clear. There are lots of allusions to that number 13, and just the sheer fact, even that the heroine in this piece is described as wearing like white, flowy, long dresses. That is exactly what Boulanger wore almost all the time. So I think that she was comfortable with saying that I am represented in this work. And after this point, she kind of continued to do that with the few works that she created afterwards. She composed part of an opera where she also really identified with the heroine of that. And I think that was kind of like an emotional release for her. Dr. Pusta.
This was great. I really appreciated your focus on Boulanger as a hero, really, who decided to write herself and her own personal story into her music. It makes me think a lot of the Romantic tradition, and you mentioned at one point that this cycle you could think of it as a parallel to Schubert's Winterreise. So I was curious if you thought of, or how you understood Boulanger fitting in the broader narrative of music history that we often tell, where we say, well, sometime around 1900, French musicians especially those that were winning fancy prizes, became modern as opposed to romantic. I was curious to ask you how you think about Boulanger. Do you think of her as a woman inserting herself into the Romantic tradition and kind of reclaiming a Romantic tradition that was largely represented by men until that point, or more of a modernist composer, the way we often think of other prominent French musicians of this period, or maybe a little bit of both?
I think of her, I would say, kind of on the very cusp of the end of Romanticism leading into modernism. The Rite of Spring was actually composed in 1913, which is right around the same time as that, and that's often considered kind of the venture into modernism. So I see elements of modernism and really dense Romanticism as well. I think that this kind of worked against her because she was on the bridge between these two eras. I think she's often forgotten, and we remember other people like Stravinsky and Debussy instead. I mean, along with the fact that, of course, she was a woman, she's remembered for these other things, but I think that, yeah, I would say that she's a mix of the two, probably leaning more towards Romanticism, but especially in songs like number 6, Si tu ceci n'est qu'un fleuve, I see a lot of modern chromatic motion that, to me, really kind of gazes forward.
Great, thanks.
I'll go here first.
So I'm very intrigued by the 10th song in this set, the Columbine Flowers.
Mhm.
And in looking at the text here, it says that the flowers, they seem to be on a level with one another. It's not like one is superior in any way. And in your saying that, Lili saw herself in this cycle so much, and that it's an indication of her relationship with Nadia, having it be as such that the text was written independently of her, is there any writing about her sisterhood with Nadia? Was their relationship indicative of, you know, her, this heroism that Lili has, or this, you know, childhood joy, or is it, you know, is there still that element of Nadia being the older sister and treating her sister, you know, as someone to be protected?
That's a great question. I think they had a really close relationship. Lili, I think, often really looked up to Nadia. She did a lot of the same things that Nadia did first. So, I mean, everything from like auditing the same classes, sitting in on Nadia's lessons. I think she was really inspired by her sister. With that said, though, I do think that specifically Nadia and their mother, Raisa, I think they really treated Lili like this thing that needed to be protected. They always kind of saw her as that delicate invalid, so I think that was always kind of a factor in the relationship, but I don't think that Nadia saw herself as above Lili. And I think actually Nadia even acknowledged that she thought Lili was a better composer. Nadia actually, she entered the Prix de Rome competition in I can't remember if it's 1910, 1911, very, very soon before, and she actually didn't win. She entered for composition as well. She won, I think, second place, and I think that she really encouraged her sister to come up and, you know, win one for the family again. What's interesting is that their father, Ernest Boulanger, he also won the Prix de Rome when he was younger. So I guess it just kind of runs in the family. But I think, I do think that they had a really special bond. And when Lili passed away, I think Nadia was absolutely crushed, as she should be. So, but there's actually a work by Caroline Potter, I believe. It's a whole book on Nadia. I think it's called Nadia and Lili Boulanger, and it's all about their relationship and where they were together. So if you are interested in reading some of that, that's a good source to look at. Professor Swenson?
Yeah, thanks. My question is a two-part question. So of course, as your teacher, I know these songs, and it's interesting that you say they're on the end, the very sort of the borderline between the Romantic period and the post-Romantic period that is to come. But you know, like in the case of Henri Duparc, who is so heavily influenced by Richard Wagner, and indeed in this, what you're going to sing, we hear a clear reference to Wagner also. Is there a sense in her writing, her composing, that shows an influence by other composers of her day or before that you've noticed? That's question one. Question two, as a soprano, as a singer, a lyric soprano such as yourself, how do you find the vocal demands and the navigation of the tessitura, the range, the length of line of these songs? How do you feel, what are the specific challenges that you have come up against?
Sure. So to answer the first question, I think that because of where she lived and because she was directly like friends and a student of so many people like Gabriel Fauré, I mean the cycle is literally dedicated to Gabriel Fauré. I think that she was absolutely influenced by a lot of the other French Impressionist composers of the time. I see a lot of Debussy Fauré in her work, Duparc as well. I lost my train of thought for a second. But I think in the end, it's her own work. This is her. This is absolutely Lili. And to me, this is like the most dramatic, dense romanticism out of any of the French Impressionists at the time. But yeah, she was definitely, I think, definitely influenced by the others and knowingly, you know, used some of their works as inspiration. But to answer your second question, these works are very demanding. You'll hear there's just these big leaps in pitch all over the place. We go high, we go low, there's a really wide range. And so that has been difficult. A lot of pieces for soprano kind of tend to stay in the same realm and same like 5 to 10 notes. And this requires a lot more. It took me several months to really get these into my voice and start to get them to fit. Because when I originally started them, I was struggling because I was trying to give the same amount of volume and like passion to the lower notes in the lower range as the higher notes. And you can't really do that. You have to divvy up the amount of energy and the amount of volume that you give to both of them. And you have to be really strategic about that. So I was finding myself taxed after singing them, which is actually something I don't normally have. But I was encountering these and I was like, ugh, how am I going to perform these? How am I going to do all of, well, I'm not doing all of them, but 7. How am I going to do 7 of these? But gradually, I kind of figured out how to divvy up the amount of vocal energy within the piece. Something else that's really difficult as well is that I talked about these like unexpected dynamic contrasts in places that you wouldn't expect them at all. So on a lot of the high notes, where I would love to just belt them out to you, she has it written pianissimo. Even if leading right up to it, we had a big crescendo, there's that direct cut, this kind of anticlimax that happens, and that's hard to kind of rein it in at the last second. Yeah, those are some of the things that I struggled with, but in the end, it's worth it. So I hope you'll think it's worth it. Any other questions? Sure.
So you talked about some like detailed spots where your research influenced how it should be sung. And I would be curious, clearly you did a lot of research for this. I'm curious how that's influenced your overall interpretation of the 7 songs that you're going to perform.
Can you say the first part of your question one more time?
I'd be interested to know how your research has affected your interpretation as you've worked in these pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. So upon starting them, I listened to there's not very many recordings, but I listened to a few recordings that there are, and I would have to say that they are not very reflective of any kind of research into her biography. And so listening to them first, as I'm trying to learn them, a lot of the singers, I heard tenors and sopranos singing it, would just like belt it completely out, and sing it like it's like Puccini. And I realized very quickly that you can't do that. That's not what she meant. If you were looking at the page, that's not what she meant. If you do any kind of research on her, that's not what she intended. So there's just so much nuance in this music that as I researched more and more and more, I started to add more and more things to it, and I still don't feel like I've made it nuanced enough. But it's like every measure requires a research. Like everything it requires special attention. And the other way that I also was tempted initially, another way that some other performers have performed it, they kind of perform it really timidly, kind of reflecting her as being, weak, fragile. And that's tempting to do that as well, but also not in the score and not who she was. She was a hero, she was strong, and there are moments where that absolutely comes out. So I think it's important to have all of that contrast infused into it, and I've been learning along the way, and I've been trying to input that.
That's awesome, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so I'm gonna take about a 5-minute break because I don't want to take up too much time, and then me and my incredible accompanist, Maeve Berry, will perform these for you. So I will see you guys in about 5 minutes. I will see you. Je